The 2024 presidential campaign is off to an awfully slow start. The Republican primary will determine which candidate faces off against the person who is already the presumptive Democratic nominee for the presidency. That's the incumbent president, Joe Biden. So it's in the Republican primary where we'll see the competition. That's the place where we don't know the results. The year began on the heels of Ron DeSantis's enormous landslide victory in a Florida governor's race. It was a historic victory, the largest in the state's history. And because of Donald Trump's insanity, the fact that Republican donors in that moment, Republican members of Congress seemed poised at long last to finally move on, he began the year as something of a frontrunner. He was the frontrunner because there was no other plausible candidate except Trump within the constellation of other candidates to be the Republican nominee. Now, Ron DeSantis didn't have to campaign in these last few months the way that he did. He could have chosen to do something else. What he could have chosen to do is to bring the game to him. The Republican media figures, super donors, activists, early state activists, and everyone else could have been asked if they wanted an audience to fly to Tallahassee. There is a model for this. It's what George W. Bush did in the 2000 campaign. Here's how it works. Outside the governor's mansion would have been the press, set up with their microphones and cameras. They would have filmed the people walking in, just like they did the people walking in through the lobby of Trump Tower after he became president-elect. And then on the way out, those people could stop at the microphones and they could give testimony about the fact that they thought that Ron DeSantis was the greatest leader since, well, I guess Lincoln. It would have been a moment that required them to take a physical, actual step away from Trump, away from Mar-a-Lago, towards Ron DeSantis in Tallahassee. In that moment of time, Governor Ron DeSantis was leading the former president by 14 points. A few months later, the Wall Street Journal polling, which is always excellent, indicates that Ron DeSantis has flipped to being 14 points down. That's an extraordinary attrition of almost 30 points. And what it signals is that Ron DeSantis doesn't have a situational problem. He has a structural problem. He's achieved something extraordinary through his insularity. Now, I've written about Ron DeSantis in the past. I talked about him and his wife running a mom and pop shop of malice. He doesn't listen to advisors. He's an insular figure, walled off. He doesn't particularly like people. Now, these are essential elements to running a successful presidential campaign. And I think what Ron DeSantis didn't understand is that he was like a Bush pilot who pointed his propeller plane at the stars and tried to be an astronaut. And it just stalled out. And now he's plummeting to the proverbial earth. So Ron DeSantis isn't going to recover. Where will Ron DeSantis's votes go? I think they'll go to Senator Tim Scott. What a perfect candidate for this moment in time. The Black Republican senator from South Carolina who announced his nascent bid overlooking Fort Sumter, where he tried a new one on for size. He declared that it was, in fact, the Democratic Party that was the new face of the American Confederacy. Yes, you heard it right. The party that has made Hakeem Jeffries the leader is the new party of Jefferson Davis and Robert E. Lee. And the person that is going to stop it, well, you guessed it, Senator Tim Scott. This is a perfectly delusional message in step with the zeitgeist of the Republican Party in this rancid moment. The idea that this won't work in Iowa is ludicrousness. It will work. So Tim Scott is going to become very quickly in this race the #2 competitor to Donald Trump. then there's a handful of other people in the race. Now, what they all share in common is that they were all players in the Trump administration. Every single one of them were loyal lieutenants of Donald Trump until the very end. Mike Pence, Nikki Haley, Chris Christie are all people who supported Donald Trump through thick and thin. They have all celebrated his incompetence as accomplishments. They all said he was the right person to lead America, which is an issue that should raise profound questions, not just about their character, but about their judgment. So when you look ahead to a debate stage in the Republican Party, you have Chris Christie. He has no claim on the presidency. He has no pathway to the nomination, but he presents an interesting proposition. 8 years on, he may be the only Republican who is willing to stand on a debate stage and go toe-to-toe with Donald Trump. And he seems to be genially ambling his way around America like a little kid, saying, pick me, put me in the game. I'll do to Trump what I did to little Marco. Except for Donald Trump's not little Marco. Donald Trump is the big kahuna of the MAGA movement and the Republican Party. And Chris Christie stood behind him like a Stepford wife from the moments that Donald Trump won the New Hampshire primary right through to the very bitter end. In fact, Chris Christie was one of Donald Trump's debate coaches who tried very hard to teach Donald Trump how to use Joe Biden's stutter against him. Just the type of character we need in the White House for national healing. So this Republican primary, because it is so appalling, because it is so unthinkably bad, is naturally so slow starting. Normally, the races are well underway, but the only action so far has been DeSantis's collapse. The next thing will be Tim Scott's rise. Mike Pence and Nikki Haley and Chris Christie, the only other somewhat plausible candidates, have no chance, have no excitement. And so when you look at this race, it's very easy to get to the place that we have to start thinking about as a country, which is the catastrophe of a Biden-Trump rematch in 2024. Now, I've expressed a lot of reservations about an 82-year-old president serving until age 86. Frankly, I think it's inappropriate, and I think it represents a profound lack of judgment on Joe Biden's part, and it is an act that lacks humility. That being said, the choice will be perfectly clear, because on one side of the contest stands a faction that seeks to burn down the American experiment. On the other side stands a leader of a Democratic Party that is committed to its preservation. That is what the campaign is about. There is nothing new to learn. There is no insight to be gained. This is the most transparent election that there will ever be. And it is an issueless one, because the only issue that matters is a belief in the U.S. Constitution, the American way of life that it underpins, and American democracy that lights the world. You are either for that or you are against it. At the end of the day, there is an irreconcilable issue in American life, and it's this: who won the 2020 election? And the person who won it is the President of the United States today. The question matters because it is definitional to a line that exists in American life where the lie and the truth meet. And the cancerous degradations that have flowed downhill from the election lie have done profound damage to the United States. And on one side of that stands a political caucus of extremists who, through their actions, seek power illegitimately. And there's no room to compromise with the coalition that includes neo-Nazis, militias, fascist thugs, and paid liars who support it. So what lies ahead for the American people amongst those handful of candidates is a campaign of nonsense and delusion and gaslighting, and one that Donald Trump will likely win. And there will, of course, then be the general election, which Joe Biden won the last time by a few thousand votes across 3 states. Everything is on the line in 2024. There should be no mistake about that. There is no chance that Donald Trump will be a good president, like some suggested in 2016. There is no chance that he will moderate. There is no chance that he will change. There is no chance that anything will be different. It will just be worse. A person who is running with vengeance at the top of his agenda, retribution and retaliation for a political defeat, seeks to become the most powerful person in the world again. The Democratic Party is a flawed institution. Joe Biden isn't a perfect candidate by any stretch of the imagination. But in the contest ahead, each Republican candidate brings to the table a spectacular type of unfitness, a type of cynicism that renders them unfit to lead the American nation and people into the 3rd decade of the 21st century. We risk with these people our peace, our prosperity, and our liberty. What they are is perfectly clear. They will never be anything else other than that. It's time to face the danger, and it is time to finally, thoroughly, absolutely, and irrevocably shatter the MAGA movement, to bring it to the ash heap where it belongs, alongside Jim Crow and the Confederacy and all the other pustules of malice which have come to the surface over the long history of the American story, but that in the end have always dried up and withered away.